Welcome to our show, welcome everybody. This is Speaker's Corner, and I am your consummate host, Timothy Byron. Come one, come all! Oh yes, float to the bosom of knowledge as the zephyrs of reason and understanding lift you, defying the gravity of ignorance that pulls down on so many to a barren earth bereft of education. Sunlight is the best disinfectant, but not actually treatment for COVID. Which, if 2020 has taught us anything, is how rampant misinformation and absolute nonsense are in the world. Ah yes, it is through valid and factual information that one gains understanding, not only comprehension of the subject matter, but of others, allowing one's Weltanschauung to grow beyond the confines of one's corner in one's home. The inimitable exposure to something unlearned opens new worlds. Science, maths, sociology, history, archaeology, art, music, video games, even government. That will be the focus of this episode of our show, considering the current events. Government, specifically American government, even more specifically, the Electoral College. The Electoral College, yes, that most baffling of institutions for selecting a country's executive leader. It is the embodiment of the world's oldest democracy's founders, a mix of freedom's promise with a reluctance of entrusting the populace to choose its leader. The Electoral College is, to put it bluntly, an anachronistic relic. It is the penny farthing of democracy. Familiar with the penny farthing, are we? Yes, the penny farthing, that giant wheeled bicycle that led to better and more complete vehicles for conducting one's own voyage. Why is the penny farthing like the Electoral College? The penny farthing is a large, old, timey-wimey, wibbly-wobbly machine that initially only affluent men could do in their travails, that eventually other and much better forms would overtake, thus relegating the penny farthing into the dustbin of nostalgic reliquary and cartoonish stereotypes. One can say the same of the Electoral College. It started off as a novel invention for getting from a monarchy to a democracy that only affluent men could ride. See how well that worked out. Before delving into the Electoral College's history, we must explore what the Electoral College is. So, what exactly is it? It is a collection of electors that select the President of the United States on the basis of whom that state's voters decide wins the state's electoral votes. Seems complicated, but let's dive into things. No better way to learn how to swim than at the deep end. Actually, no, that is patently false, and do not ever attempt to learn how to swim at the deep end unless you're an orca calf, which, if you are, this must be way into the future, and you lot have evolved enough to watch millennia-old streaming videos. In that case, my orca doesn't even work, but that was essentially hello, hello, hello. Anyway, back to the subject. The Electoral College. The United States currently has 50 states that are eligible to give electoral votes for the nation's top executives, the President and Vice President. The public gets its choice between the party's presidential and vice presidential nominees after a grueling primary process and what feels like a decades-long election cycle that starts effectively at the end of the previous presidential campaign. The current system in the US has a two-party system consisting of the left-leaning and centrist Democrats and the conservative Republicans. Now, these two parties are, essentially, the only ones that matter, despite there being other, smaller, but considerably less consequential parties, such as the Libertarian and Green parties, who also hold their own conventions to select presidential and vice presidential candidates. Fast forwarding to the big day, Election Day. This day has always been the first Tuesday in November, every 4 years, and is a date that the Congress agrees to before its occurrence. Thus, there is no way a president can choose the date or stop it altogether, as that is not within his or her power. Not even this one. The most recent election was on the 3rd of November 2020, and Lordy, it still feels like it's going on, doesn't it? No matter when you decide to watch this video. Yes, I'm talking to you too, my lovelies. I'm pretty sure they still don't know if Trump won North Carolina by the time you lot are watching this in the year 2010, 741. Evolution works really quickly once it gets going, doesn't it? Well, at least on some creatures. On this big day of Election Day, people go to the polls and vote for their preferred candidates. However, there was one major caveat to consider in the year 2020. That's right, a global and crippling pandemic. Now, this pandemic upset the way that many Americans voted, from in-person to mail-in ballots, which, contrary to what many would have one believe, is not that novel of a concept. Now, the military has been voting through the mail since the American Civil War, and it has produced nary a fraudulent vote, no matter the rhetoric from the current executive. Nonetheless, Americans cast their votes for their executive and job's done, right? Not so fast. It depends on where this American happens to reside primarily, but this American can only reside or be a principal resident in one of the 50 states for their vote towards the executive to count. I'm looking at you, Puerto Rico and Guam. Thusly, that American's vote counts towards their state's total for a candidate, and the candidate who wins the state gets all the Electoral College votes pertaining to it. A majority is not a necessary, as plurality will suffice. It's true, I won my home state of Florida, even though I only moved here like last week. So beautiful, so perfect. My palace at Mar-a-Lago is the most beautiful. The people here love me. And they gave me all their votes, all their 471 votes. Landslide, massive, huge blowout win for these United States of America. Well, that wasn't remotely close to true, apart from you somehow winning the state of Florida. So, as he said, he gets all of the state's Electoral College votes, which amount to 29. The presidential candidate that gains 270 or more Electoral College votes wins the presidency, which in 2016 and 2020 was both 306. Now, history may not repeat, but it sure does rhyme. Remember, rhyme and reason don't always go hand in hand. What determines a state's Electoral College votes? The number of congressional representatives that state has. We're getting into the maths now, so better get your calculators, abacus, or those of you far off in the future, math chips in your brains ready to go. Every American state gets 2 senators, serving in the upper house or the Senate. The lower house, the House of Representatives, bases its representation by its population accordingly within the state. Therefore, there are a few states with 2 senators and a single representative. That is to say that the state has such a small relative population that it only has a representative's worth of representation in the House of Representatives, but still has 2 senators despite that small size, whereas states as population-heavy as California can have 53 representatives, yet only 2 senators. If you're starting to comprehend how antiquated and undemocratic the system is, then you may not have to be a futuristically advanced orca. There are 2 exceptions to this rule, the states of Nebraska and Maine, which have split their Electoral College votes by congressional district rather than statewide. The Electoral College and Senate give a massive advantage to smaller states because it gives them more representation in both, despite their relatively smaller populations, which is as the founders intended. Nonetheless, a state like California is massive and worth 55 of the 538 Electoral College votes because of its 53 representatives and 2 senators, whereas a state like Wyoming is worth 3 votes due to its lone representative and 2 senators, despite California's population being 68.27 times more than Wyoming's. Now that we have the maths in hand, then one can surmise what the logic to winning the presidency is. It is not convincing the majority or even plurality of Americans to vote for one, but to garner the majority of electoral college votes. Thus, one can theoretically pander to those states and thus win the presidency, even if one loses the popular vote by a substantial amount. Just in the past 20 years, that has already happened. The case in which the president won the most electoral college votes, despite having considerably fewer popular votes, George W. Bush in 2000 and Donald J. Trump in 2016. Maybe the voters were onto something there. What swung these votes were... That's right! Ding, 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 ding! Swing states! Now, these states that are constantly in play because they are neither too Democratic nor too Republican, so they are not a guarantee for either party and thus become major foci of both presidential campaigns. The campaigns inundate and flood these states with a bombardment of rallies, advertisements, and all sorts of other material to convince those voters in those states, which tend to have a very high population and thus electoral college vote count to choose them. That way, they not only gain those valuable swing votes, but also take away those same votes from the opponent, as there is only a finite amount of votes. Do you remember how many? Yes, that's right, 538. Now, the most prominent swing states for the past 20 plus years have been Ohio, Florida, Pennsylvania, and North Carolina. However, changing demographics and Herculean efforts to expand voting rights in some states have elevated them to the status of swing from previously heavily Republican, such as Arizona and Georgia. Now, before Election Day, one can easily assume that some massive states will go a particular way. California and New York will almost always go to the Democrats, so Joe Biden had nary a care to campaign there in 2020 and could count on those states' combined 84 electoral college votes to fall in his column. Texas is almost always a lock to vote Republican, so its 36 electoral college votes would definitively end up in Trump's favour, with a lot of other more reliable states and their corresponding votes going his way, even though this year Texas was allegedly going to be close and a swing state. Thus, campaigns can effectively ignore states they already know are theirs and instead focus on the swing states to woo those valuable voters, rather than what is arguably their core base of supporters. That is why it was so important for the Biden campaign to focus on Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, Arizona, and Georgia, which they did relentlessly in the final month and few weeks leading up to the election. Whoever won those states, no matter the size of the total vote winner's margin, would definitively win the election, and thus the presidency. Those were 5 states that Trump won the plurality of the votes in 2016 and therefore became president, despite Hillary Clinton getting 2.9 million more votes than him in the overall count, which many would agree is a far less democratic process than rewarding with the presidency that person has the most electoral college votes, no? Well then, what happens after tabulating all the votes and all the news networks and states call their votes for the winner? Those electoral college votes are actually people. Soylent Green style. Not really. Those 55 Californian electoral college votes actually go to a real live person who then casts their ballot for president, and the candidate with the majority of those votes then becomes president. Now, due to the polarised nature of the 2016 election, there was some hope that the electors would undo the, quote, will of the people, unquote, and select someone competent and willing to hold the office, which is what the founders intended. They wanted the Electoral College to be a fail-safe, an emergency button in case the hoi polloi ever happened to select someone vastly unqualified and abjectly unable to fulfil the duties of the office. My, how could that ever happen? Therefore, these electors would vote on the first Monday after the second Wednesday in December to ratify officially the candidate who then becomes president. Currently, there are ongoing discussions about shenanigans to undermine the will of the people, both electorally and by popular vote, of removing Biden as president-elect by having Republican-controlled state legislators choose Republican electors and vote to give Trump the presidency. This is not only undemocratic and unconstitutional, but also illegal, and would result in all kinds of chaos were they so brazen to attempt this stunt. Nonetheless, on the 14th of December 2020, the majority of electors will have chosen Biden to become president, whose term would start on the 20th of January 2021. Like I said earlier, this system is confusing and antiquated, but what is there to do about it? Is there a solution to eliminate how undemocratic it is for a popular vote loser to become the country's lead executive? There is, to an extent. The first is to abolish the Electoral College, which is damn near an impossibility at this point, as that would require a constitutional amendment. The process of passing an amendment would require a modern-day miracle, as 3/4 of the states, along with 2/3 of both houses of Congress, would have to vote for it, which is never going to happen in such a divided, partisan nation. Now, the current Electoral College system clearly favours one party, as its ideas and policies fade in popularity with the ever-evolving demographics that lean, if not tip over completely, the other way. Thus, eliminating the Electoral College is not an option, at least until consensus becomes the norm and not the rarity. An actual plausible solution, actually, is the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. Rather than eliminate the Electoral College, why not ignore it? The compact proposes that these states will give their electors to whomever wins the national popular vote, and not the candidate who wins the most votes in their state. Therefore, it wouldn't matter if a candidate wins Texas, should Texas be a part of the compact, as the national popular vote winner would get Texas. However, the big stick in the gears for this compact to progress is that it requires, that's right, states with a combined 270 Electoral College votes to sign up for and ratify it. Now, if this compact were in place in 2000 and 2016, then who knows how much history may have changed. Nonetheless, the point is moot until it is in effect, but it would be more representative of an actual democracy rather than what the present Electoral College claims to represent. There are still some kinks to its machinations and some scholarly legal debate as to the compact's legitimacy, but it would be a leap in representative democracy for these United States of America. That's it. That's our show for the day, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, everyone. I hope that sheds some light on this needlessly complicated process. Now, don't forget to chime the bell, click the subscribe button, and, of course, like. This is Tim Byron. Ta-ta! Cheerio! Until next time. Remember the subscribe button, eh? Hello again, my lovelies. Thank you so much for watching that video. It really means a lot. Well, what can I say? Keep the smile going. Do remember to subscribe, ring that bell. It helps out like you wouldn't believe. It just makes me so happy. You can see this big smile of mine. Keep calm, carry on, keep a stiff upper lip. And if you like, there are some other channels in the description. I apologise for their content, but I think they're worth a watch, probably. If anything, just to educate yourself. Best of the British to you. Pip pip, cheerio. And don't forget to subscribe. Till next time, this was Speaker's Corner. Ta-ra.